The scent of freshly cut grass and sizzling barbecue hung heavy in the warm June air, a familiar perfume that always signaled the start of the Maple Creek annual community picnic. Children's laughter, sharp and bright as lemonade, stitched the scene together, a vibrant tapestry of families spread across colorful blankets on the sprawling green of Harmony Park. My daughter, 7-year-old Chloe, her pigtails bouncing like joyful springs, was in the heart of it, her joyous, slightly off-key singing accompanying a game of tag near the swing set. Her infectious giggle, a sound that was pure sunshine to my ears, a sound that could always draw a smile from the most reluctant face echoed across the park. Chloe had Down syndrome, and she experienced the world with an open, unvarnished delight that was a constant, humbling lesson in presence. Today she was a whirlwind of pink tulle and boundless energy, a tiny beacon of pure, uncomplicated happiness. My name is David Carter, and I'm the Chief Food Inspector for the city's health department. It's a job that instills a kind of sixth sense, a hyper-awareness that unfortunately doesn't switch off when I clock out. As I watched my wife Laura patiently help Chloe navigate the frustrating intricacies of a juice box straw, my gaze, by force of habit, drifted over the long trestle tables, groaning under the weight of potluck offerings. Casseroles steamed gently, salads gleamed with fresh dewiness, and an array of desserts beckoned with sugary allure. It was a quintessential display of community spirit, each dish, a small, tangible offering of neighborly goodwill. Or so it should have been. My professional paranoia, as Laura sometimes teased, was usually a source of mild amusement at such events. Today, it would prove to be anything but. Something caught my eye, snagging my attention with an almost physical pull. A tray of brightly colored cupcakes, frosted with a vivid, almost electric blue icing, and topped with a cheerful explosion of rainbow sprinkles, sat prominently at one end of the children's dessert section. They looked almost cartoonishly inviting, designed to be irresistible to young eyes. But there was something else. A faint, almost imperceptible, acrid undertone to their sweet vanilla scent. Something that pricked at the very edge of my professional senses, like a tiny, sharp needle. It was a discordance, a wrong note in the symphony of familiar picnic smells. The char of burgers, the sweetness of watermelon, the yeasty comfort of homemade bread. Probably nothing I told myself, trying to dismiss the flicker of unease. An unusual artificial flavoring, perhaps, or a new brand of food coloring. But the unease lingered, coiling in my gut like a cold serpent. I saw Miss Peterson, Agnes Peterson, the self-appointed and universally acknowledged guardian of Maple Creek's moral and aesthetic standards, hovering near that particular table. She was a gaunt woman in her late 50s, her face perpetually set in lines of disapproval, her presence often casting a subtle chill over any gathering. She wasn't known for her culinary contributions. Her offerings were usually a joyless plate of dry crackers or a bland, watery gelatin mold, nor for her particular fondness for children, especially children who didn't fit her narrow, rigid definition of normal. Her gaze, sharp and bird-like, flickered towards Chloe, who was now attempting a cartwheel, then back to the cupcakes. A strange, tight little smile played on her thin lips, a smile that held no warmth, no amusement, only a kind of knowing, unsettling satisfaction. That smile, more than the faint, unsettling odor, sent a jolt of genuine alarm, cold and sharp, through me. Before the picnic, Agnes had actually made a show of being, if not friendly, then at least less overtly hostile. She'd approached Laura a few days earlier at the local market, complimenting Chloe on a new bright yellow sun hat, a gesture so out of character it had left Laura bemused. Such a vibrant child, Agnes had remarked, her tone unreadable. It's important they have their little treats, isn't it? In hindsight, the manufactured pleasantries were a chilling prelude. Laura, I said, my voice low, trying to keep the sudden, sickening urgency from it. Keep Chloe away from those blue cupcakes for a minute, would you? Just a hunch. Get her some fruit, or one of Mrs. Albright's brownies instead. Laura, accustomed to my occasional food-related quirks and professional anxieties, nodded, her brow furrowed slightly in question, but she trusted my instincts. She gently steered Chloe mid-giggle towards the fruit platter at the far end of the table. I ambled over to the dessert table, feigning casual interest, my heart starting a slow, heavy thrum against my ribs. Up close, the cupcakes looked perfect, almost too perfect, the frosting unnaturally smooth. The chemical tang was stronger here, still partially masked by the cloying sweetness of the vanilla, but definitely undeniably present. I leaned in as if admiring the meticulous sprinkle placement, and discreetly wafted the air above one with my hand. My mind, a well-organized library of potential foodborne hazards, raced through a checklist of toxins, their olfactory signatures. There was one, a nitrogen-based compound sometimes found in certain older, highly restricted pesticides or less common industrial cleaning chemicals, that had a similarly sharp, slightly bitter undertone beneath a sweet, almost fruity disguise. It was also notoriously fast-acting and particularly dangerous for children due to their lower body mass and developing systems. My heart began to hammer against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat of disbelief and dawning horror. This couldn't be. Not here. Not at a community picnic, an event celebrating togetherness and shared joy. I glanced around. Several children, drawn by the vibrant colors like moths to a flame, were already making a beeline for the cupcakes, their small hands outstretched. Peterson watched them approach, that same unnerving, tight smile fixed on her face, her eyes gleaming with an emotion I couldn't or perhaps didn't want to decipher. There was no time for subtlety, no room for doubt. "Hold on, kids," I called out, my voice louder and sharper than I intended, cracking with an urgency that drew curious, startled stares from nearby parents. "Nobody touches these cupcakes just yet. Hold on." "Niturfoin unfortimandes." I fumbled in the small, unassuming satchel I almost always carried, a habit born of years in the field, a kit that had earned me more than a few teasing remarks from Laura. It contained basic pH strips, swabs for common bacterial agents, and crucially a few reactive strips for specific chemical groups, including organophosphates and nitrogenous compounds. With trembling fingers, I pulled one out quickly, took a small scraping of the vivid blue frosting with a sterile spatula, and applied it to one of the specialized reactive strips. The color change was instantaneous, dramatic, a sickening dark violet that screamed of danger. Positive, unmistakably positive for a harmful nitrogenous agent. A wave of nausea, hot and acrid, washed over me, followed by a surge of cold, righteous fury. "These cupcakes are contaminated," I announced, my voice ringing with an authority that cut through the picnic buzz like a blade. "Nobody eats them, I repeat, nobody eats anything from this section of the table until it's been cleared by my team." I looked directly at Miss Peterson, whose tight smile had vanished, replaced by a look of pinched indignation and a flicker of something else, surprise, annoyance at being thwarted. "Ms. Peterson," I said, my voice like ice, "did you bring these cupcakes?" "I certainly did," she sniffed, drawing herself up, her chin jutting out defiantly. "They're a special recipe, a family heirloom. Perhaps your palate is simply unrefined, Mr. Carter, or perhaps you're looking for an excuse to cause a scene as usual." "My palate, Miss Peterson," I said, my voice dangerously low, each word heavy with suppressed rage, "is telling me these are laced with poison, and as the chief food inspector for this city, I'm impounding them and this entire section as evidence. I was already on my phone, dialing 911, requesting immediate police and hazmat backup." My eyes never leaving Peterson, who was now starting to look flustered, her gaze darting around as if seeking an escape route or an ally. The joyous atmosphere of the picnic had curdled into bewildered silence then, as my words and their terrifying implications sank into murmurs of shock and dawning horror. Chloe, sensing the seismic shift in the atmosphere, ran to Laura, her bright, innocent face clouded with confusion and nascent fear. My daughter and all these other beautiful, unsuspecting children had been targeted. And I had a sickening, gut-wrenching suspicion I knew by whom and why. The thought that my own vigilance might have been the only thing standing between them and unimaginable harm was a terrifying weight. The setup for this horrifying moment, this near catastrophe, had been building for months, a slow, insidious creep, ever since Miss Peterson had escalated her vitriolic campaign against what she termed the erosion of community standards and the decline of Maple Creek's traditional values. Maple Creek was generally a tolerant, inclusive neighborhood, proud of its diversity. But Peterson, a longtime resident with an inexplicably influential voice in the Homeowners Association, represented a bitter, resentful undercurrent of prejudice. She had a particular, almost obsessive animosity towards families with disabled children. She complained vociferously and frequently about the disruptive noise from the special needs playgroup that met twice a week in Harmony Park, the visual clutter of adaptive equipment like specialized strollers or communication devices, and the unnecessary and costly accommodations made for children like Chloe at community events. The inciting incident, the first truly overt and public display of her targeted malice, had occurred at a library story time a few weeks earlier. Chloe, utterly enchanted by the librarian's expressive puppets, had let out a series of happy, unrestrained shrieks and clapped her hands with an enthusiasm that for Ms. Peterson was clearly intolerable. Peterson had stood up abruptly, her voice cutting through the librarian's gentle narration like a shard of glass. Must these children be allowed to disrupt everything? She demanded, her gaze sweeping contemptuously over Chloe and two other children with visible disabilities who were also enjoying the story. Some of us come here for peace and quiet, not for a display of uncontrolled behavior and, frankly, unpleasant sounds. It's simply not fair to the normal children who are trying to learn. The librarian had been aghast, speechless for a moment. Other parents had bristled, murmuring their disapproval. Laura, her arm protectively around Chloe, had calmly but firmly told Miss Peterson that the library was for everyone, and that Chloe's joy was not a disruption, but a delight. Peterson, her face contorted with fury, had swept out, leaving a trail of discomfort, anger, and unease in her wake. Chloe, sensitive to emotional currents, had been confused and subdued for the rest of the day, asking Laura why the angry lady didn't like her happy sounds. I had been furious, recognizing the dangerous discriminatory edge to Peterson's intolerance. I had even made a mental note to be more vigilant around her, though I could never in my darkest nightmares have imagined she was capable of this. Now, as police sirens wailed in the near distance, Harmony Park was transforming from a scene of idyllic community celebration into a potential major crime scene. Uniformed officers were arriving, their faces grim as they took in the scene, the crowd of frightened parents, the tray of luridly colored cupcakes. My own team of food inspectors, alerted by my urgent call, were en route, their professionalism a small comfort in the swirling chaos. Parents clutched their children, their faces pale with fear and disbelief, some already making angry, bewildered demands for answers. The contaminated cupcakes sat like brightly colored, innocent-looking bombs on the gingham-covered table, a chilling testament to a hatred so profound, so twisted, it defied comprehension. Ms. Peterson, under the preliminary questioning of the first responding officers, was a picture of indignant denial. Poison? That's preposterous. An outrageous accusation. She declared, her voice trembling with what she clearly intended to be perceived as righteous anger. There must be some mistake. Mr. Carter is clearly overreacting, perhaps due to some personal vendetta or a desire to aggrandize his own importance. She even had the audacity to suggest that perhaps another child, unsupervised and careless, had accidentally spilled something onto the cupcakes. Her composure was remarkable, her ability to lie to dissemble chillingly proficient. The only crack in her facade was the slight, almost imperceptible tremor in her hands, and the way her eyes, hard and glittering, avoided direct contact when she delivered a particularly blatant falsehood. She kept referring to the sensitive nature of some children, implying that perhaps one of them had brought the contaminant themselves. The next few hours were a blur of systematic, urgent action. My team, working alongside stony-faced hazmat crews, carefully collected all the food items from the potluck tables, paying particular attention to those from the children's section. The park was cordoned off with yellow police tape, the cheerful picnic blankets now looking forlorn and abandoned. Witness statements were taken from every adult present. I personally oversaw the meticulous collection and labeling of the cupcake samples, ensuring the chain of custody was impeccable, my mind already anticipating the legal battle ahead. The preliminary field test was damning, but irrefutable lab confirmation would be needed for prosecution. The swiftness of our collective response had been crucial. No one had ingested the poisoned food, a small, almost miraculous mercy in a truly horrific situation. Chloe, thank God, was safe, though deeply unsettled by the chaos, the fear she saw in our eyes, and the sudden jarring end to her happy afternoon. She kept asking Laura, "Why is the picnic sad now, Mommy?" A question that twisted my heart. The rising action of this suburban nightmare began with the official lab results, which came back within hours, expedited due to the extreme severity of the situation. The poison was definitively identified as a concentrated form of nicotine sulfate, a highly toxic insecticide long banned for most agricultural and domestic uses due to its extreme danger, especially to children. A minuscule amount, the lab report starkly stated, could be lethal to a small child. The cupcakes particularly, the blue frosting had been saturated with it, the sweet vanilla and bright colors a deliberate, insidious lure. The sheer cold-blooded malice of it was breathtaking. Miss Peterson was brought in for formal questioning at the precinct. She maintained her innocence with a steely resolve, her story shifting slightly, but her indignation remaining constant. Now she claimed she'd bought the cupcakes from a new little artisan bakery downtown, a place she described in vague terms whose name she conveniently couldn't recall. She expressed profound outrage that she, a pillar of the community, a woman dedicated to upholding standards, was being treated like a common criminal. Her performance was convincing if you didn't know what to look for. The slight tremor in her hands when she gestured, the way her eyes avoided direct contact, when she delivered a particularly blatant lie. The micro-expressions of contempt that flickered across her face when she spoke of those unfortunate children and their overly emotional parents. She even suggested that perhaps David Carter had a vendetta against her because of her principled stand on certain HOA matters. The second shocking event in the rising action came a few days later, while the police meticulously built their case, hampered by Peterson's steadfast denials and the lack of direct eyewitnesses to her actually applying the poison to the cupcakes. She launched a sophisticated and vicious counteroffensive. Anonymous posts began appearing on local Maple Creek social media groups and neighborhood forums, insinuating that the cupcake incident was a hoax, a publicity stunt, a deliberate attempt by certain oversensitive elements, clearly meaning me and my family, to smear respected community members, gain undue influence in the HOA, and push a radical inclusivity agenda. The posts, cleverly worded to avoid direct libel, hinted at my overzealous professional conduct and suggested I was using my position to settle personal scores with Miss Peterson over her legitimate concerns about neighborhood standards and property values. It was a vile, insidious campaign of misinformation designed to sow doubt, divide the community, and discredit me and the investigation before the case could even reach a courtroom. Some residents, those already inclined to believe Peterson's carefully cultivated image of a concerned citizen, or those who feared her influence, and her sharp tongue began to whisper. The initial wave of horrified support we'd received from the shocked community started to fray around the edges. Doubt, like a poisonous weed, began to take root in some quarters. Simultaneously, Ms. Peterson, through her remaining allies on the HOA board, some of whom shared her exclusionary views, others simply cowed by her attempted to have our family officially sanctioned for creating a public disturbance, misusing community property for personal gain, a twisted reference to my official actions in securing the park as a potential crime scene, and falsely accusing a respected resident, thereby damaging the community's reputation. It was a clear act of intimidation, an attempt to bully us into silence to make us the pariahs instead of her. One evening, Peterson herself, brazen and cold-eyed, approached me as I was getting out of my car. "Mr. Carter," she'd said, her voice like silk draped over steel, "a word of advice. Some battles are not worth fighting. Think of your charming wife, your daughter. Accidents happen. Reputations can be ruined. Sometimes it's best to let sleeping dogs lie for everyone's peace of mind." The threat, though veiled, was unmistakable. My blood ran cold, but I met her gaze. "The only thing I'm thinking about, Miss Peterson, is justice for what you tried to do." Her eyes narrowed, and she turned and walked away without another word. The encounter left me shaken not just by the threat, but by her chilling composure. This woman was not just hateful, she was dangerous and utterly remorseless. The investigation was painstaking. My team and the police detectives, led by a sharp, no-nonsense detective named Maria Harding, worked around the clock. We traced the ingredients for every single dish brought to the picnic, cross-referencing receipts, interviewing everyone who had access to the food preparation areas in the community hall kitchen, where some items were assembled. The focus inevitably remained on those blue cupcakes. We found the artisan bakery Miss Peterson eventually reluctantly named. They had no record of such an order. Their blue cupcakes used a completely different, easily identifiable natural food coloring, and their head baker provided a sworn affidavit. Her alibi was crumbling piece by piece, but direct proof of her applying the poison remained elusive. The midpoint twist, the breakthrough that shifted the entire investigation from circumstantial to damning, came from a meticulous, court-authorized search of Miss Peterson's impeccably tidy, almost sterile home. In her kitchen, hidden at the back of a rarely used pantry shelf behind dusty tins of forgotten preserves, detectives found an old, unlabeled metal canister. Inside were the dregs of a crystalline substance that looked suspiciously like the insecticide, and tucked away in her garage amidst a forgotten pile of antique gardening supplies from a previous era, relics from her late husband, a keen horticulturist, they found several dusty antique bottles of Black Leaf 40. Black Leaf 40, a highly concentrated nicotine sulfate insecticide, a brand that hadn't been commercially available for decades, notorious for its extreme toxicity. One of the bottles was nearly empty and showed signs of recent handling, faint, fresh fingerprints on the dusty glass. But the most damning discovery, the one that laid bare the cold, calculating heart of her malice, was found in her locked home office. Alongside neatly filed HOA documents, meticulously organized complaints about various neighbors, including several about the Carter family's disruptive child, and correspondence detailing her attempts to block funding for a new accessible swing in Harmony Park, they found a small leather-bound locked journal. Detective Harding's team had to bring in a specialist locksmith to open it without damaging the contents. Its pages, filled with precise, spidery handwriting, revealed a chilling descent into a mind consumed by bitterness, resentment, and a disturbing eugenicist-tinged ideology. She wrote of the decline of community standards, the burden of the unfit on productive society, and her profound visceral resentment towards families with disabled children whom she saw as a drain on community resources, a blemish on her idealized vision of a perfect Maple Creek. There were specific hateful entries about Chloe detailing her annoying habits, her unpleasant public displays, her unseemly noises. Peterson had been meticulously documenting Chloe's life from afar, twisting innocent childhood behaviors into evidence of her unsuitability. She'd even pasted in a blurry long lens photo of Chloe playing in our yard. And then, the most horrifying entry of all, dated the week before the picnic, the annual spectacle approaches. A final decisive statement is needed regarding the children's section. A swift, effective cleansing to restore a measure of order and propriety. The blue ones, their favorite color, I'm told, will be their special treat. A small targeted application should be sufficient for the desired effect. It is a kindness in a way, a preventative measure. She had even researched the quantities needed, the masking agents for the taste and smell. It was premeditated, cold-blooded, and ideologically driven. This wasn't just an act of spite against one child. It was a planned attack, a cleansing aimed at multiple children she deemed unfit. The journal didn't use explicit terms like poison or kill, but spoke in chilling euphemisms, administering a corrective, removing the dissonant elements, a necessary purification. This was the secret that laid bare the true depth of her depravity. She wasn't just a neighborhood crank with a grudge. She was an ideologue, a would-be mass poisoner who specifically targeted society's most vulnerable, all under the guise of maintaining community standards. The personal animosity towards Chloe was just one facet of a much larger, more terrifying worldview. Alex felt a profound, soul-deep weariness. The weight of his responsibility, not just as Chloe's father, but as a public servant, felt immense. This was evil, pure and simple, hiding in plain sight in their quiet suburb. The climax was orchestrated for the emergency Maple Creek Town Hall meeting, called by concerned residents and the acting mayor to address the poisoning incident and the growing fear and division within the community. Miss Peterson astonishingly attended. Perhaps she believed she could still sway public opinion with her practiced air of martyrdom. Or perhaps more chillingly, she was so convinced of her own righteousness that she couldn't conceive of her downfall. She sat in the front row, flanked by a stony-faced lawyer, her expression one of martyred innocence and quiet suffering. I was asked to speak first, not just as Chloe's father, but as the city's chief food inspector. My voice was steady, though my hands trembled slightly as I clutched the podium. I laid out the facts of that day, the initial detection, the rapid field test, the lab results confirming the presence of nicotine sulfate. I spoke of the potential lethality, the deliberate targeting of the children's dessert table. The hall was silent, gripped. Then Detective Harding took the podium. She was calm, methodical, her voice devoid of emotion, as she presented the chain of evidence, the discovery of the nicotine sulfate in Peterson's home. The antique Black Leaf 40 bottles, the forensic analysis confirming the substance in the canister and on the cupcakes, matched perfectly. She detailed the crumbling alibi, the bakery's denial. And then, her voice dropping slightly, she began to read excerpts from Agnes Peterson's journal. A collective gasp, a wave of horrified revulsion swept through the packed hall. Parents clutched each other, some weeping openly. Faces that had previously shown skepticism or cautious neutrality were now etched with horror and disbelief. Miss Peterson's face, for the first time since this ordeal began, lost its carefully constructed composure. It turned ashen, then a mottled red. Her eyes, wild and desperate, darted around the room like a trapped animal seeking an escape that didn't exist. She started to shout, her voice shrill, hysterical. "Lies, fabrications, that's not my journal. It's planted evidence. He's framing me, that man, Carter. He's always hated me for speaking the truth about this neighborhood." Her lawyer tried to restrain her, but she was beyond control. Her denials, however, were drowned out by the rising tide of community outrage. One by one, other parents stood up, their voices trembling, but resolute, recounting Peterson's past acts of prejudice, her cruel comments, her attempts to marginalize their children, the atmosphere of intimidation she had fostered for years. A father whose son used a wheelchair spoke of Peterson demanding he use the service entrance to the community pool. A mother whose daughter had autism described Peterson publicly shaming her child for stimming in the grocery store. The carefully constructed facade of Agnes Peterson, respected community elder defender of traditional values, shattered completely, revealing the hateful, dangerous individual beneath. The sheer weight of shared experience of collective testimony was overwhelming. As Detective Harding finished her presentation and formally announced that Ms. Peterson was being charged with multiple counts of attempted murder terrorism due to the intent to cause mass harm to civilians and disrupt community life, and hate crimes based on disability, Peterson collapsed in her chair, a broken, sobbing wreck. The drama of her public unmasking was absolute, the fall from grace complete and devastating. The falling action began with Ms. Peterson's immediate arrest in the town hall, this time with no possibility of bail. The evidence was irrefutable, her public meltdown having sealed her fate in the court of public opinion long before she reached a courtroom. The community of Maple Creek was plunged into a period of profound shock, grief, and intensive soul-searching. How could such venomous hatred have festered in their midst unnoticed by so many for so long? The HOA was thrown into turmoil, Peterson's few remaining allies either demonstrably complicit and now under investigation themselves for enabling her discriminatory practices or scrambling to distance themselves from her toxic legacy. Many residents expressed deep shame and regret for not speaking out sooner against her bullying and prejudice. The legal proceedings were thankfully swift. Faced with the overwhelming forensic evidence, the damning words from her own journal, and the testimony of numerous witnesses, Agnes Peterson had no viable defense. Her attempts to plead insanity or diminished capacity due to her grief over her late husband, who it turned out had been a gentleman often embarrassed by his wife's intolerance, were dismissed. She was found guilty on all charges and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The judge condemning her actions as an attack on the very soul of community and innocence, a betrayal of every decent human instinct. For Maple Creek, the healing was a slow, deliberate, and often painful process. The annual picnic for a time was a source of communal trauma, a reminder of their brush with unimaginable horror. But the incident also served as a powerful, albeit terrible, catalyst for change. Neighbors reached out to each other offering support and apologies. Bonds were strengthened, and a fierce protective solidarity emerged, particularly around the families Peterson had targeted. Workshops on inclusivity, disability awareness, and recognizing the signs of extremist ideologies were organized by concerned citizens and local groups. The HOA was entirely restructured with a new charter drafted by a diverse committee emphasizing compassion, transparency, genuine community engagement, and the active celebration of diversity in all its forms. Safety protocols for all community events underwent a radical overhaul with a new emphasis on vigilance and collective responsibility. Laura, my incredible wife, became a leading voice in this movement, her quiet strength and unwavering compassion inspiring many. The resolution for our family, and especially for Chloe, was complex and ongoing. Chloe had nightmares for a while. She became wary of crowds and unfamiliar food, her innate trust in the world shaken. For a long time, she wouldn't go near Harmony Park, the place of her near-death experience. But surrounded by the unwavering love of her family, the dedicated support of her therapists, and the gentle, patient care of a community now acutely aware of its responsibility to protect its most vulnerable members, her innate joy, her resilient spirit began to re-emerge. She started asking about the swings again, her questions hesitant at first, then more insistent. There were small victories, a tentative visit to the park with me and Laura, a nervous giggle on the newly installed accessible swing, a shared ice cream cone with a new friend whose mother had been one of Peterson's most vocal critics. One afternoon, she came to me while I was trying to read a troubled look on her usually sunny face. "Daddy," she asked. Why was that lady so angry at my happy sounds? I held her close, struggling for words. "Sweetheart," I said, some people have a darkness inside them and they don't like the light in others. But her darkness couldn't put out your light, could it?" She shook her head fiercely, then hugged me tight and whispered, "I love you, Daddy." In that simple moment, I felt a measure of peace, a sense that perhaps my own guilt for not protecting her perfectly could begin to heal. A year later, the Maple Creek Community Picnic was held once more in Harmony Park. It was a different event, smaller, perhaps more subdued in its revelry, but also infinitely more meaningful. There were new safety measures, food meticulously checked by a volunteer committee I had trained, but more importantly, there was a palpable sense of unity, a quiet determination to reclaim their shared space from the long shadow of hatred. Chloe, holding my hand tightly as we walked in, eventually let go, drawn by the familiar, irresistible sound of children's laughter. She ran towards the swing set, her pigtails flying, her delighted shrieks, once again part of the park's joyful symphony. Later, she presented a huge, colorful drawing she had made to the new HOA president, a vibrant depiction of Harmony Park, filled with smiling children of all abilities, playing together under a giant, benevolent sun. It was hung in the community center, a permanent reminder of their renewed commitment. Watching her, my heart ached with a mixture of residual pain from the trauma and an immense, overwhelming pride in her resilience. The evil we had faced was profound, a chilling glimpse into the abyss of human intolerance. But the strength of the human spirit, the courage of individuals like Mrs. Henderson and Laura, the transformative power of a community united against hatred was more powerful still. My job as chief food inspector had never felt more vital, not just as a protector of public health, but as a guardian against the insidious poisons of intolerance, prejudice, and hate that could threaten any community anywhere. Maple Creek had learned a terrible, painful lesson, but in doing so, it had found a deeper, more authentic, and infinitely more precious harmony, a harmony where every child's laughter, in all its diverse and wonderful forms, was cherished as the sacred, life-affirming music it truly was, and that I knew was a victory worth every ounce of the fight,